The biting Chicago wind whipped around David as he stepped out of the taxi, the gleaming facade of the Grand Hotel towering over him. He clutched a bouquet of Emily's favorite white lilies and a small bag containing a box of artisanal chocolates. His usually meticulously styled hair was a mess, flattened on one side from leaning against the taxi window, and his eyes carried the telltale signs of a sleepless night. Dark circles and a dull, distant gaze. His clothes, a rumpled button-down shirt and khakis, were a far cry from his usual sharp office attire. He looked and felt utterly disheveled, a physical manifestation of the turmoil churning within him. He pushed through the revolving doors, the warmth of the lobby a stark contrast to the chill outside. Yet it did little to thaw the icy knot of anxiety in his stomach. The opulent surroundings, polished marble floors, glittering chandeliers, the hushed murmur of conversations, seemed to mock his inner chaos. He scanned the lobby, half expecting to see Emily, but she was nowhere in sight. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he approached the front desk, where a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Sarah was attending to a guest. When it was his turn, David forced a strained smile. "Excuse me," he began, his voice raspy. "I'm looking for my wife, Emily Miller. She should be checked in here." He paused, trying to maintain an air of normalcy, though his hands trembled slightly as he placed the flowers and chocolates on the counter. We had a bit of a fight. She left our home in the suburbs yesterday, said she needed some space. I just want to apologize and make things right." He hoped his explanation sounded plausible, that his desperation wasn't too evident. He just wanted to find her, to talk, to fix whatever had broken between them. Sarah, the receptionist, listened patiently, her expression shifting from polite efficiency to something akin to sympathy. She nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "Miller, you said," she confirmed, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. David watched her, a flicker of hope igniting within him. This was it. Soon, he'd have her room number. He'd be knocking on her door, and they could finally begin to mend things. He imagined her surprise, perhaps a tearful embrace, and then the quiet, earnest conversation that would lead them back to each other. But as Sarah's eyes scanned the computer screen, a subtle change came over her. Her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. She typed a few more keys, her movements becoming less fluid, more hesitant. Then she looked up at David, and the kindness in her eyes was now mixed with a strange, almost pitying expression. Her gaze darted around the opulent lobby, as if checking to see if anyone was within earshot. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the distant clinking of glass from the hotel bar. David's heart gave an involuntary lurch. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, her eyes fixed on his. "Mr. Miller," she began, her tone hushed, conspiratorial. "Your wife isn't checked in here." She paused, and David felt a cold dread begin to spread through him. He opened his mouth to protest, to say she must be mistaken, but Sarah cut him off with a gentle, insistent shake of her head. Her gaze flickered to the screen again, then back to him, her expression grave. "She checked out 3 days ago," she continued, her voice even softer. "With another man." The words hit David like a physical blow. The air seemed to rush out of his lungs. He visibly recoiled, his body stiffening, his face draining of all color. The vibrant red of the lilies he still clutched in his hand seemed to mock the sudden pallor of his skin. He stared at Sarah, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. It couldn't be true. It simply couldn't. Emily wouldn't do that. Not Emily. his Emily. The entire reason for his desperate, hopeful visit instantly crumbled into dust. The apology, the flowers, the chocolates. They all became meaningless, absurd props in a play that had just taken a dark, unexpected turn. A cold, hollow ache began to spread through his chest, quickly followed by a pounding in his ears that drowned out the quiet hum of the hotel lobby. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. His world, which moments ago had been on the precipice of reconciliation, now teetered on the brink of an unfathomable abyss. The cold dread that had begun to spread through David quickly intensified, solidifying into a block of ice in his stomach. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the whispered words with the woman he thought he knew. Emily? With another man? It was an impossibility. Yet the receptionist's grave expression, the hushed tone, the way she had looked around before speaking, it all pointed to a truth David was utterly unprepared to face. His grip tightened on the lily stems, their delicate petals now crushed in his trembling hand. He had met Emily 5 years ago, on a crisp autumn afternoon, in a small, independent coffee shop just a few blocks from his downtown office. He remembered the exact moment. She was sketching in a notebook, completely engrossed, her dark hair falling over her face. And he, clumsy with his latte, had bumped into her table, sending a cascade of sugar packets and stir sticks clattering to the floor. Their eyes had met, and a shy, apologetic smile had bloomed on her face, melting away his immediate embarrassment. They had talked for hours that day. Oblivious to the world outside the cozy cafe, he learned she was an aspiring artist, fresh out of art school, brimming with dreams and a quiet, intense passion for life. He, a pragmatic marketing executive, found himself captivated by her free spirit and vibrant imagination. Their early days were a whirlwind of shared laughter, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, and spontaneous adventures. They explored hidden corners of Chicago, spent weekends sketching in parks, and cooked elaborate, often disastrous meals in his tiny apartment. He had never felt so alive, so completely understood, with anyone before. Emily was his muse, his confidant, his best friend. 2 years later, they stood before a small gathering of family and close friends, exchanging vows in a sun-drenched botanical garden. Their wedding was intimate, filled with heartfelt promises and the soft scent of blooming jasmine. They spoke of a future woven together, a tapestry of shared dreams, a cozy house with a garden for Emily's green thumb, children's laughter echoing through its halls, and a lifetime of simple, happy moments. David had believed every word, every promise. He had seen their future, stretching out before them, clear and bright, like an endless summer day. Emily was, to David, the embodiment of kindness. Her empathy was boundless, her touch gentle. She possessed an artistic soul, seeing beauty in the mundane, transforming ordinary landscapes into vibrant canvases. She was also, he admitted, a little bit impulsive, prone to sudden bursts of inspiration that would send her off on a quest for a specific shade of paint or a rare type of flower. He had always admired this unbridled enthusiasm, this fierce independence that set her apart. It was one of the many qualities that had first drawn him to her, that made her uniquely Emily. But in the last 6 months, a subtle shift had begun, almost imperceptible at first. Like the slow creep of shadows at dusk, Emily had become more distant, her once bright spark dimming slightly. Their shared silence, once comfortable, now felt heavier, laden with unspoken thoughts. She spent more time in her studio, the door often closed, and less time engaged in their usual evening rituals, cooking together, watching movies, simply talking. Her vibrant interest in their shared activities seemed to wane. David, ever the pragmatist, had attributed it to work stress, perhaps a creative block, or simply a rough patch that all long-term relationships inevitably encountered. He told himself it was normal, a phase, and that with a little patience and understanding, they would navigate through it. He tried to be supportive, to give her space, to offer a listening ear, but every attempt to bridge the growing chasm between them seemed to be met with a polite, almost practiced, deflection. The fight that had culminated in Emily's departure, the one that had sent David on this desperate journey to the Grand Hotel, had been, in hindsight, tragically trivial. It began with a misunderstanding about dinner plans. David had suggested his favorite Italian place. Emily had vaguely mentioned wanting something lighter. The conversation had spiraled, fueled by unspoken frustrations and simmering anxieties. Emily had accused him of being controlling, of not listening, of suffocating her creative spirit. David, stung by the unfairness of it, had retorted with accusations of her growing aloofness, her increasing secrecy. The words, once spoken, hung in the air, sharp and irreparable. Emily, her eyes flashing with an unfamiliar anger, had declared she needed to get away, that she needed space, to breathe. She had packed a small bag, kissed him on the cheek with a detached politeness that chilled him to the bone, and walked out the door, leaving David standing alone in their quiet suburban home, the echoes of their argument reverberating in the silence. He had spent the next 24 hours in a haze of regret and worry, convinced that if he could just find her, if he could just talk to her, he could undo the damage. He had rehearsed his apology 100 times in his head, each word carefully chosen, each sentiment deeply felt. He wanted to make things right. He wanted his Emily back. But the receptionist's whispered words had just shattered that carefully constructed hope into a million irreparable pieces. The Emily he thought he knew, the Emily he was desperate to reconcile with, now seemed like a stranger, a ghost from a life that might never have been real. His heart pounded irregularly, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden shocking silence of his inner world. The cold dread that had begun to spread through David quickly intensified, solidifying into a block of ice in his stomach. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the whispered words with the woman he thought he knew. Emily? With another man? It was an impossibility. Yet the receptionist's grave expression, the hushed tone, the way she had looked around before speaking, it all pointed to a truth David was utterly unprepared to face. His grip tightened on the lily stems, their delicate petals now crushed in his trembling hand. He had met Emily 5 years ago, on a crisp autumn afternoon, in a small, independent coffee shop, just a few blocks from his downtown office. He remembered the exact moment she was sketching in a notebook, completely engrossed, her dark hair falling over her face, and he, clumsy with his latte, had bumped into her table, sending a cascade of sugar packets and stir sticks clattering to the floor. Their eyes had met, and a shy, apologetic smile had bloomed on her face, melting away his immediate embarrassment. They had talked for hours that day, oblivious to the world outside the cozy cafe. He learned she was an aspiring artist, fresh out of art school, brimming with dreams and a quiet, intense passion for life. He, a pragmatic marketing executive, found himself captivated by her free spirit and vibrant imagination. Their early days were a whirlwind of shared laughter, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, and spontaneous adventures. They explored hidden corners of Chicago, spent weekends sketching in parks, and cooked elaborate, often disastrous meals in his tiny apartment. He had never felt so alive, so completely understood, with anyone before. Emily was his muse, his confidant, his best friend. 2 years later, they stood before a small gathering of family and close friends, exchanging vows in a sun-drenched botanical garden. Their wedding was intimate, filled with heartfelt promises and the soft scent of blooming jasmine. They spoke of a future woven together, a tapestry of shared dreams, a cozy house with a garden for Emily's green thumb, children's laughter echoing through its halls, and a lifetime of simple, happy moments. David had believed every word, every promise. He had seen their future stretching out before them, clear and bright like an endless summer day. Emily was, to David, the embodiment of kindness. Her empathy was boundless, her touch gentle. She possessed an artistic soul, seeing beauty in the mundane, transforming ordinary landscapes into vibrant canvases. She was also, he admitted, a little bit impulsive, prone to sudden bursts of inspiration that would send her off on a quest for a specific shade of paint or a rare type of flower. He had always admired this unbridled enthusiasm, this fierce independence that set her apart. It was one of the many qualities that had first drawn him to her, that made her uniquely Emily. But in the last 6 months, a subtle shift had begun, almost imperceptible at first, like the slow creep of shadows at dusk. Emily had become more distant, her once bright spark dimming slightly. Their shared silence, once comfortable, now felt heavier, laden with unspoken thoughts. She spent more time in her studio, the door often closed, and less time engaged in their usual evening rituals, cooking together, watching movies, simply talking. Her vibrant interest in their shared activities seemed to wane. David, ever the pragmatist, had attributed it to work stress, perhaps a creative block, or simply a rough patch that all long-term relationships inevitably encountered. He told himself it was normal, a phase, and that with a little patience and understanding, they would navigate through it. He tried to be supportive, to give her space, to offer a listening ear. But every attempt to bridge the growing chasm between them seemed to be met with a polite, almost practiced, deflection. The fight that had culminated in Emily's departure, the one that had sent David on this desperate journey to the Grand Hotel, had been, in hindsight, tragically trivial. It began with an misunderstanding about dinner plans. David had suggested his favorite Italian place. Emily had vaguely mentioned wanting something lighter. The conversation had spiraled, fueled by unspoken frustrations and simmering anxieties. Emily had accused him of being controlling, of not listening, of suffocating her creative spirit. David, stung by the unfairness of it, had retorted with accusations of her growing aloofness, her increasing secrecy. The words, once spoken, hung in the air, sharp and irreparable. Emily, her eyes flashing with an unfamiliar anger, had declared she needed to get away, that she needed space, to breathe. She had packed a small bag, kissed him on the cheek with a detached politeness that chilled him to the bone, and walked out the door, leaving David standing alone in their quiet suburban home, the echoes of their argument reverberating in the silence. He had spent the next 24 hours in a haze of regret and worry, convinced that if he could just find her, if he could just talk to her, he could undo the damage. He had rehearsed his apology 100 times in his head, each word carefully chosen, each sentiment deeply felt. He wanted to make things right. He wanted his Emily back. But the receptionist's whispered words had just shattered that carefully constructed hope into a million irreparable pieces. The Emily he thought he knew, the Emily he was desperate to reconcile with, now seemed like a stranger, a ghost from a life that might never have been real. His heart pounded irregularly, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden shocking silence of his inner world. After Emily had left, David felt a profound sense of emptiness, a hollow ache that settled deep in his chest. The silence of their suburban home, usually a comforting presence, now felt oppressive, amplifying his guilt and regret. He tried calling and texting her countless times, his thumb hovering over the send button, drafting and redrafting messages, oscillating between desperate pleas and attempts at light-hearted conversation. Each unanswered call, each unread text, twisted the knife of his concern a little deeper. He knew Emily sometimes needed space to process her emotions, a trait he had always admired as part of her artistic temperament. But this felt different. This silence was heavier, more absolute than any she had imposed before. It felt less like a need for space and more like a deliberate, calculated withdrawal. A few weeks prior to their argument, Emily had started mentioning a new friend, a woman named Lisa. According to Emily, Lisa was a fellow artist she had met at a gallery opening downtown. Emily spoke of Lisa with an almost childlike excitement, describing her as incredibly talented, insightful, and just gets her art in a way no one else did. Soon, Emily began spending increasingly more time with Lisa, attending art shows, workshops, and late-night studio sessions that often stretched into the early hours of the morning. David, though initially pleased that Emily was finding new inspiration and companionship, began to feel a slight, persistent unease about Lisa. Emily would often be vague about their plans, her explanations sometimes contradictory, and whenever David suggested a double date or expressed a desire to meet this new influential friend, Emily would quickly deflect, saying Lisa was shy or busy or simply not really a socializer outside of artistic circles. He tried to brush off his growing suspicion, telling himself he was being insecure, that Emily just needed her own independent life and friends, something he had always encouraged. He rationalized that his own busy work schedule probably made him feel a little left out, a little jealous of her vibrant new creative world. Then a memory surfaced, a fleeting comment Emily had made months ago, almost in passing. She had mentioned, during a conversation about finding inspiration, that she sometimes found the perfect quiet and light for her painting in certain downtown hotels, specifically recalling the Grand Hotel as having just the right ambiance for focused artistic work. The thought had been a mere whisper in his mind before, overshadowed by his guilt and desire for reconciliation. But now it solidified into a desperate plan. He would go to the Grand Hotel. He would surprise her there, flowers and chocolates in hand, ready to pour out his heart, to apologize for his part in their argument, to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. He imagined her surprise, perhaps a moment of initial stiffness, followed by a softening, a tearful embrace, and then the quiet, earnest conversation that would lead them back to each other. He clung to this hope with a fierce desperation. He genuinely believed that he could fix things, that their love was strong enough to overcome this rough patch. He had spent hours selecting the perfect bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, and sought out the artisanal chocolates she adored, convinced these small gestures would speak volumes of his remorse and unwavering affection. He saw himself knocking on her door, the flowers held out, his apology ready on his lips, and her opening the door, her eyes widening in surprise, then softening with relief. He envisioned them sitting together, talking for hours, rediscovering the connection that had once been so effortless. He wanted to tell her how much he missed her, how empty the house felt without her laughter, without her presence. He believed with every fiber of his being, that this grand gesture, this pursuit of her to her artistic sanctuary, would prove his devotion and mend the rift. He had arrived at the hotel, full of this fragile hope, ready to fight for their future, completely unaware that the very foundation of that future had already been irrevocably shattered by a truth he was about to hear. The receptionist, Sarah, leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a low, almost mournful whisper that was barely audible above the faint hum of the lobby. "Mr. Miller," she began, her gaze darting briefly to the empty expanse of the hotel lobby, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Your wife isn't checked in here. In fact, she checked out 3 days ago." David's heart, already a frantic drum in his chest, stumbled. A wave of relief, fleeting and irrational, washed over him. Perhaps she had gone home. Perhaps she was waiting for him there. But then Sarah continued, her voice even lower, the words delivered with a practiced, regretful solemnity. "With another man." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. David's mind, still reeling from the initial shock, struggled to process the gravity of that final phrase. He felt a sudden, disorienting lightness, as if the air had been sucked from the room. "I'm sorry," he managed to stammer, his voice a dry, rasping sound he barely recognized as his own. Could you repeat that? I think I misheard you." He desperately hoped he had. He hoped the stress, the sleepless nights, the sheer emotional exhaustion had played tricks on his ears. He hoped Sarah would correct herself, would laugh and say it was a misunderstanding, that Emily was just in the spa, or perhaps had left a message for him. But Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't correct herself. Her expression remained one of deep, almost pitying apology. She confirmed, her voice still low and empathetic, that he had heard her correctly. She turned back to her computer, her fingers gliding across the keyboard with a practiced efficiency that seemed jarringly normal in the face of David's unraveling reality. With a discreet flick of her wrist, she angled the screen slightly towards him, pointing with a long, manicured finger to a line of text. "She checked out on Tuesday morning, sir," Sarah explained, her voice hushed, as if sharing a painful secret. "The name on the reservation was Emily Miller, but the checkout details clearly show her departure with a Mr. Daniel Hayes." She paused, her gaze meeting David's with a flicker of genuine regret. "I even had a brief interaction with them at checkout. They seemed very cozy, if you know what I mean." Cozy. The word hung in the air, a venomous dart aimed directly at David's already shattered heart. His mind raced, scrambling for an explanation, a rationalization, anything to make sense of the incomprehensible. Emily wouldn't do this. Not his Emily. There must be a mistake. "Daniel Hayes?" He repeated the name silently, searching his memory for any connection, any friend or acquaintance of Emily's by that name. Nothing. His mind, usually so sharp and analytical, felt like a tangled mess of wires, sparking with frantic, disconnected thoughts. Maybe Daniel was a business partner, an art dealer she was meeting with, a long-lost relative he didn't know about. He tried to cling to these desperate possibilities, but the word cozy echoed in his ears, a relentless, mocking refrain. Sarah's casual observation, delivered with such innocent candor, painted a picture that was starkly at odds with any innocent explanation he could conjure. The image of Emily, his Emily, being cozy with another man, twisted his gut into a knot of nausea and disbelief. As if sensing his spiraling doubt, or perhaps just wanting to provide undeniable proof to soften the blow, Sarah, her brow furrowed with concern, typed another command into her computer. "We keep security footage of all major exits and entrances, sir," she said quietly, her eyes still on the screen. Just for security purposes. A moment later, an image materialized on the monitor, a still from a security camera. It showed the hotel's main entrance, bathed in the soft morning light. And there, in the center of the frame, was Emily. She was laughing, her head thrown back slightly, a radiant, uninhibited joy lighting up her face. Her hand was intertwined with that of a man David didn't recognize. He was tall, with dark, neatly combed hair, and a confident, easy smile. He was handsome, in a way that made David's stomach clench. The man's arm was casually draped around Emily's waist, pulling her slightly closer, and she leaned into him, her body language radiating an intimacy that was impossible to misinterpret. The flowers David still clutched in his hand suddenly felt like a cruel joke, a heavy, ridiculous burden. The image on the screen, frozen in time, was a punch to the gut, a visual confirmation of the unthinkable. His Emily, the woman he had come to reconcile with, the woman he had loved and cherished, was not only with another man, but she was happy. Genuinely, unequivocally happy in a way David hadn't seen her in months. The flowers, the chocolates, his carefully rehearsed apology, they all crumpled into insignificance in the face of this brutal, undeniable truth. The world around him faded, leaving only the searing image of Emily's betrayal burned into his mind. Seeing the photo shattered David's denial into a million shards. The image of Emily, radiant and intimate with another man, was not just a punch to the gut. It was a complete demolition of everything he thought he knew, everything he had built. The flowers in his hand, once symbols of hope and reconciliation, now felt like a grotesque parody, heavy and ridiculous, their petals a mocking reminder of his naive belief. His carefully constructed world, built on trust and shared dreams, imploded in an instant, leaving behind only the acrid dust of betrayal. He stared at the screen, his eyes burning, trying to reconcile the laughing, carefree woman in the photo with the Emily he had loved, the Emily who had walked out of their home just days ago, claiming she needed space. The disconnect was jarring, a chasm too wide to bridge. "Daniel Hayes," David heard himself say, the name a raw, unfamiliar sound on his trembling lips. He looked up at Sarah, his gaze hollow. "His full name, and any other information you can legally provide." Sarah, her expression a mix of pity and professional concern, nodded slowly. She understood that the game had changed. This was no longer about a husband trying to reconcile with his wife. It was about a man confronted with a devastating truth. She typed a few more commands into her system, her fingers moving with a quiet efficiency that was a stark contrast to the storm raging within David. "Daniel Hayes," she confirmed, her voice soft. "He paid cash for their stay, Mr. Miller. There's no credit card on file for him, and no loyalty program details. Just a phone number he provided for emergencies, though I can't guarantee its validity." She recited the number, and David, fumbling for his phone, punched it into his contacts. A new entry for a man who had just become the architect of his pain. A terrible, sickening thought clicked in David's mind, a realization that sent a fresh wave of nausea washing over him. Lisa. The name escaped his lips, barely a whisper. Could Daniel be Lisa? Or was Lisa merely a carefully constructed decoy, a smokescreen designed to divert his attention while Emily pursued her clandestine affair? He started piecing together Emily's vague answers about her new friend, her sudden late nights, the way she would always deflect when he suggested meeting Lisa. It all fit now, with a horrifying, precise clarity. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, now snapped into place, forming a picture of calculated deception. Emily hadn't just been distant, she had been actively building a separate life, a secret world he knew nothing about. The artistic workshops and gallery openings suddenly took on a sinister new meaning, cloaking illicit rendezvous and stolen moments. A surge of white-hot anger, cold and sharp, coursed through David, quickly followed by a profound, soul-crushing hurt. The anger was a visceral reaction to the betrayal, the audacious deceit. The hurt was for the shared life, the dreams, the promises that now seemed like a cruel, elaborate joke. He thought of their small, intimate wedding, the vows exchanged under the sun-drenched sky, the quiet plans for a future filled with children and laughter. All of it, every cherished memory, was now tainted, poisoned by the image of Emily laughing in the arms of another man. The foundation of their marriage, once so solid, had been eroded from within, leaving him standing on unstable ground, staring into an abyss. He felt foolish, naive, like a character in a bad play, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding backstage. The purpose of his visit, the very reason he had driven all the way to downtown Chicago, had shifted entirely. He was no longer there to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to mend a broken relationship. That Emily, the one he had come to win back, no longer existed. In her place was a stranger, a woman capable of a deception so profound it left him breathless. His new goal was clear, cold, and unwavering. He was there for answers. Not the kind of answers that would lead to reconciliation, but the kind that would expose the truth, no matter how painful. And perhaps, lurking beneath the raw hurt and anger, was a nascent desire for justice. Not revenge, not yet, but a burning need for accountability, for Emily to face the consequences of her actions. He thanked Sarah, his voice strained and hoarse, a mere shadow of its former self. He turned from the counter, the lilies and chocolate still clutched in his hand, a mocking reminder of his shattered hopes. He walked out of the Grand Hotel, not as a hopeful husband, but as a man whose world had just been irrevocably torn apart, leaving behind the wreckage of a life he thought he knew. The bustling city outside seemed indifferent to his pain, its relentless rhythm a stark contrast to the silent scream echoing in his mind. The air, once filled with the promise of reconciliation, now felt heavy with the weight of betrayal. He had arrived, seeking solace, and found instead a devastating truth that would redefine his future. David drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into streaks of color he barely registered. The familiar route, once a comforting pathway back to shared memories, now felt like a cruel loop, each turn bringing him closer to a house that was no longer a home, but a monument to his unwitting ignorance. He walked through the front door, the silence of the house pressing in on him, amplifying the cacophony of betrayal in his mind. The flowers and chocolates, still in his hand, were tossed onto the kitchen counter, their vibrant colors now mocking his earlier optimism. He felt numb, a hollow ache where his heart used to be, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. His grief, for now, was overshadowed by a burning need for answers, for the complete, unvarnished truth. He went straight to Emily's study, a room she had always guarded jealously, claiming it was her creative sanctuary. Now, it felt like a vault of secrets. He powered on her laptop, his fingers surprisingly steady. He started digging, meticulously sifting through her digital life. He checked her email, her browsing history, her cloud storage. Nothing overtly incriminating at first. Emily was careful, he realized, almost professional in her deception. He then remembered her old phone, tucked away in a drawer, a relic she rarely used. He powered it up, hoping for a lapse in her digital hygiene. It was there, amidst old photos and forgotten apps, that he found it. A hidden message folder, cleverly disguised within a productivity app. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened it. The messages were intimate, sickeningly so. Pet names, inside jokes, plans for secret rendezvous. And the sender was Daniel. Not just any Daniel, but Daniel Hayes, the real estate agent. The man from the hotel. The man in the security photo. David scrolled through months of conversations, each message a fresh stab to his gut. He learned that Daniel wasn't an artist, as Emily had implied with her Lisa cover story. He was a high-end real estate agent, a fact that suddenly explained Emily's newfound interest in property listings and open houses. The messages detailed their stolen weekends, their clandestine dinners, their shared dreams of a future together, a future that systematically excluded David. He found photos too, not just at the hotel, but at various restaurants, a quiet park they often frequented, and even a small, tastefully decorated apartment. His blood ran cold as he recognized the distinctive architecture of a building in a trendy, upscale neighborhood he knew Emily often admired. He found another chilling piece of evidence in one of Emily's seldom-used handbags, tucked away in a hidden pocket. A shiny, new apartment key. It was for the building he recognized from the photos, the one Daniel and Emily had so casually discussed in their messages. It was a key to a life she had been building without him, a life she intended to walk into, leaving him behind. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Emily wasn't just having an affair. She had been living a double life, meticulously constructing an alternate reality, piece by calculated piece, right under his nose. The Lisa persona, the art classes, the sudden need for space. It was all a carefully orchestrated charade, a performance designed to keep him in the dark while she prepared her escape. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard resolve. David knew he needed to confront her, but not in a fit of rage. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him unravel. He wanted to be calm, collected, and armed with an arsenal of irrefutable evidence. He wouldn't allow her to lie, to manipulate, to turn the tables on him. He would dismantle her carefully constructed facade, brick by painful brick. He spent the rest of the night and the following day methodically gathering his evidence. He printed out the incriminating messages, hundreds of them, spanning months. He downloaded the photos of Emily and Daniel, not just the hotel security image, but the intimate selfies, the stolen moments that painted a vivid picture of their illicit relationship. He even made a copy of the apartment key, a tangible symbol of her planned betrayal. His plan began to solidify. He wouldn't immediately confront her. He would wait. Emily would eventually return home, expecting him to be apologetic, perhaps even desperate for her forgiveness. She would expect him to be the one on the defensive, begging her to stay. He wanted to hit her with the truth when she least expected it, when she was basking in the glow of her perceived victory. He imagined her smug expression, her carefully rehearsed excuses, and he felt a chilling resolve harden within him. He wouldn't just expose her infidelity. He would expose the depth of her deception to everyone who had ever admired their perfect marriage. Their families, their friends, the people who had always seen Emily as the charming, artistic, free-spirited woman he had believed her to be. He would make sure they all knew the truth about the woman she truly was. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, about reclaiming his dignity, about ensuring that Emily faced the full, unvarnished consequences of her actions. He would not be the silent, cuckolded husband. He would be the one who brought the truth to light, no matter how painful. Emily eventually returned home a few days later, gliding through the front door with an air of practiced nonchalance. She carried a small overnight bag, as if she had merely been away for a weekend retreat, and her expression was a carefully constructed mask of mild annoyance, tinged with a hint of condescension. She looked at David, her eyes sweeping over him, as if assessing a piece of furniture, clearly expecting to find him broken, contrite, and ready to beg for her forgiveness. There was no apology in her demeanor, no hint of remorse for her absence or the argument that had preceded it. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for him to initiate the familiar dance of reconciliation, expecting him to be the one to bridge the gap she had so deliberately created. She probably anticipated a tearful apology, a desperate plea for her to stay, a reaffirmation of his undying love and devotion. But David was no longer that man. David, however, was surprisingly calm. The storm of emotion that had raged within him for days had settled into a cold, hard resolve. There were no histrionics, no accusations screamed across the living room. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, almost unnervingly so. He didn't yell or accuse. He simply gestured towards the dining room table, where he had meticulously laid out his evidence, each piece a silent, damning testament to her deception. It was a tableau of betrayal. The crisp white hotel receipt, detailing her stay and checkout. The grainy but unmistakable security photo, capturing her laughter and Daniel's arm around her. The stacks of printed messages, page after page of intimate exchanges, revealing the depth and duration of their affair. And finally, resting conspicuously atop the pile, the small, gleaming apartment key. It was a visual indictment, a silent presentation of a case that was far beyond reasonable doubt. Emily's carefully constructed composure began to crack. Her face, which moments before had been a picture of cool indifference, went from annoyance to a flicker of confusion, then to dawning shock as her eyes registered the items on the table. The color drained from her cheeks, and a palpable fear began to creep into her eyes. She tried to deny it, of course. Her voice, initially a defiant challenge, wavered. "What is all this, David? What are you doing? This is an invasion of my privacy." She tried to turn it around, to accuse him of being paranoid, of snooping, of betraying her trust. She reached for the messages, her hand trembling, as if she could somehow make them disappear. She attempted to dismiss the hotel receipt as a mistake, the photo as a misunderstanding, the key as something she had found. But the sheer volume and undeniable clarity of the evidence were too overwhelming. Each piece corroborated the next, creating an inescapable web of deceit. There was no room for plausible deniability, no narrative she could spin to escape the truth laid bare before her. David remained impassive, his gaze unwavering. He let her stammer, let her grasp at straws, letting the weight of her lies crush her under their own burden. When she finally faltered, her denials dissolving into desperate mumbles, he spoke again, his voice still low but imbued with a chilling clarity. "I know about Daniel Hayes, Emily. The real estate agent, not an artist, and I know about the apartment." He recounted, with a startling precision that clearly terrified her, how long she had been planning this, how she had used Lisa as a convenient, artistic cover story. He detailed the timeline of her deception, the stolen moments, the calculated excuses, the gradual erosion of their life together, all meticulously planned to facilitate her escape into a new one. He exposed the depth of her perfidy, the sheer audacity of her double life, the cold calculation that had gone into every lie, every feigned argument, every moment of feigned affection while her heart belonged to another. The space she needed, he explained, wasn't from him. It was space to build a new life with Daniel. Emily finally broke down, but it wasn't remorse that fueled her tears. It was a raw, furious anger that she had been caught, that her intricate web of lies had been unraveled, that her carefully laid plans had been exposed. She screamed, not in apology, but in frustration, in humiliation, in the rage of a person whose carefully constructed illusion had been shattered. She lashed out, verbally, trying to wound him, to shift the blame, to diminish his pain, anything to avoid confronting her own culpability. But David was beyond her reach. He had already processed the pain, the anger, the grief. What remained was a steely resolve. He looked at her, not with hatred, but with a profound sense of detachment, as if observing a stranger. "I want a divorce, Emily," he stated, the words cutting through her emotional outburst with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, "and I will make sure everyone knows the truth about why. Every single person who ever believed in our perfect marriage, every friend, every family member, they will know exactly what you did." He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. "Pack your bags, Emily, and leave. Now." The finality of his voice left no room for argument, no space for negotiation. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Emily's ragged sobs and the rustle of papers on the dining room table, each one a testament to the end of their shared life. The initial days and weeks after Emily's departure were a maelstrom of conflicting emotions for David. The raw wound of betrayal throbbed, a constant ache beneath the surface of his forced composure. There was anger, a simmering rage at the deception, at the years he had unknowingly spent living a lie. There was grief, not for the woman Emily had revealed herself to be, but for the idealized version he had loved, for the future they had meticulously planned that now lay shattered at his feet. The house, once filled with the echoes of their life together, felt cavernous and empty, each silence a stark reminder of what was lost. He found himself replaying conversations, analyzing Emily's subtle shifts in behavior, piecing together the puzzle of her infidelity with a grim fascination. He recognized the signs he had ignored, the vague excuses, the growing distance, the sudden need for space. He chastised himself for his naivete, for his unwavering trust. Yet, amidst the pain, a strange sense of liberation began to take root. The suffocating weight of the unknown, the gnawing suspicion that had subtly plagued him, was gone. The truth, however brutal, had set him free from the gilded cage of a lie. He started therapy, a decision he had initially resisted, but one that quickly proved invaluable. His therapist helped him navigate the complex emotional landscape, to process the anger without letting it consume him, to grieve the loss while recognizing the toxicity of what he had escaped. He reconnected with old friends, some of whom had drifted away during his marriage to Emily, and found solace in their unwavering support. Their stories of resilience, their shared laughter, gradually began to mend the fractured pieces of his spirit. He rediscovered his own hobbies, interests that had been sidelined in favor of Emily's artistic pursuits. He started hiking again, spending hours on trails, letting the quiet majesty of nature soothe his frayed nerves. He picked up his old guitar, strumming familiar chords, finding a therapeutic rhythm in the music. The divorce proceedings, as expected, were messy. Emily, fueled by a potent cocktail of shame and indignation, initially attempted to fight him, to paint him as the villain, the controlling husband who had driven her away. But David was prepared. He had meticulously documented every piece of evidence: the hotel security photo, the printed messages, the apartment key, even a detailed timeline of her affair. His lawyer, a shrewd and empathetic woman, presented an irrefutable case. Faced with the overwhelming proof of her infidelity and calculated deception, Emily's legal team had little ground to stand on. The court, seeing the clear pattern of deceit, awarded David a fair settlement, recognizing his emotional distress and the financial implications of Emily's actions. The ripple effect of the truth extended far beyond the courtroom. Emily's reputation, once pristine and admired, took a significant hit. Their mutual friends, many of whom had initially expressed sympathy for Emily, quickly distanced themselves when confronted with the undeniable facts. The image of their perfect marriage, so carefully constructed by Emily, crumbled, revealing the rotten core beneath. Even her family, after initially rallying around her, found it increasingly difficult to defend her actions in the face of such damning evidence. Daniel Hayes, the high-end real estate agent, also felt the repercussions. The scandal, publicly exposed during the divorce proceedings, tainted his professional image. Clients, particularly those in the close-knit affluent circles he frequented, began to question his integrity and discretion. His career, built on trust and reputation, suffered a noticeable decline. David often reflected on that fateful day at the Grand Hotel. The whispered words from a seemingly insignificant hotel receptionist had, in a single moment, irrevocably altered the trajectory of his life. It was a painful truth, a truth that had shattered his world. But paradoxically, it had also saved him. It saved him from continuing to live a lie, from investing more years, more emotions, more of himself into a relationship built on sand. It saved him from the slow, insidious erosion of his self-worth that prolonged deception inevitably brings. He was grateful for that whispered warning, even though it had trembled him to his core, for it was the catalyst for his awakening, his painful but necessary rebirth. Months turned into a year, then two. David's life began to rebuild, stronger and more authentic than before. He was more introspective, more attuned to his own needs, and infinitely more discerning about the people he allowed into his inner circle. He learned to trust his instincts, to recognize red flags he had once dismissed. He was no longer afraid of solitude, but embraced it as a space for growth and self-discovery. Then, quite unexpectedly, he met someone new. Her name was Sarah, a different Sarah, not the receptionist, but a kind, intelligent woman he met through a mutual friend at a hiking group. She was an architect with a quiet strength and a genuine warmth that resonated deeply with him. He found himself drawn to her honesty, her directness, and the easy comfort of their conversations. He was cautious, of course, the wounds of his past still a tender memory. He took things slowly, allowing their connection to develop organically, without the rush and intensity that had characterized his relationship with Emily. He was open with her about his past, sharing his story with a vulnerability he hadn't known he possessed. Sarah listened with empathy, her understanding gaze a balm to his soul. Their relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect, transparency, and a shared appreciation for the simple, honest moments of life. He found himself smiling more, genuinely laughing, experiencing a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He was hopeful, cautiously so, but undeniably hopeful for a future that felt earned, authentic, and truly his own. David now understood that sometimes the most painful truths are indeed the ones that set you free. They force you to confront uncomfortable realities, to dismantle false narratives, and to embark on a journey of self-discovery that you might never have undertaken otherwise. The whispered warning in a hotel lobby had been a devastating blow, a moment of profound shock and betrayal, but it had also been a gift, a harsh but necessary awakening that had ultimately led him to a place of greater peace, self-awareness, and the possibility of genuine happiness. He carried the scars of his past, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of his resilience, testaments to his journey, and silent guardians protecting the future he was now building, brick by honest brick.